try to cheat on my final exam? Watch your plan go down in flames. I see quite a few stories in here about students taking revenge on their teachers. I thought it was time I posted a story about instructors taking revenge on their students. I teach part-time as adjunct faculty at a business school. I have a policy in many of the courses that I teach that if you do better on the final exam than on the midterm, your final exam grade replaces your midterm exam grade. One semester some students decided to exploit this. Apparently in an earlier semester, a student took photographs of his exam paper. This is absolutely against the rules. Somehow, I didn't discover it at the time. A student sent me an anonymous tip that my exam was compromised. I was actually going to write a fully new exam for that section that semester, but I decided to test the student's assertion. I took the exam in question that was compromised, and I completely and subtly rewrote it. I made it so that it looked the same as the old exam. However, if you actually read it you'd see that the questions, or sometimes answers, on multiple choice questions, were subtly changed, such that the correct answer would be very different. Any student who wasn't familiar with the old exam and wasn't relying on it would do fine, because none of the wording was misleading or anything. It was just very misleading if you expected the previous exam to be that day's exam. The class average was a little lower than average, but most students did about as I would have expected. However, about 7 students that clearly knew each other pretty well got very, very bad grades on the exam and failed it. None failed the course, but all of them had their overall grade go down significantly. I never heard a word of challenge from any of them. I've no idea if they figured out what I did. But I'm glad that student gave me the tip. I now routinely do this, just in case. No idea if it's helping. But an instructor has to keep his students on their toes. Now to the comments. I taught computer lab in the late 80s at a tech trade school in Arizona. One day another lab instructor figured out that a student had been borrowing completed assignments from the in-basket, was copying them, via data entry into his workstation, printing the copied assignment, and was placing the required cover sheet on the copy with his name. Once he returned the original assignment and his copy, he figured nobody would ever be the wiser. To be honest, it wasn't very usual for this type of cheating to go on because this was a tech trade school for adults who paid good money to attend and learn a trade, so we aren't usually suspicious of such tactics. We realized he still hadn't turned in any of the last 3 assignments. But this is because, of course, none of the other, advanced, students had turned in anything for him to duplicate as of yet. So we made our own assignment, which was the next one which we anticipated he would copy. We put the finished bait assignment in the lab's in-basket and waited a couple days. He copied it, of course. The kicker, the program output that students were required to print out along with the assignment listing. The first column of every line it output spelled out the phrase, vertically, if you looked at it, IAMACHEATER. Oh man, kind of reminds me of an organic chemistry course I took. The professor gave us back our exams after she marked them. I went in to ask about missing marks on one question and she pulled out a photocopy she had made of my original exam to verify that I had not changed my answers before coming to her. Apparently, she had caught quite a few people like that. Gave me a heart attack for a second before I remembered I hadn't even cheated anyways, so there was nothing to be scared about, haha. Stupid brain of mine. Pretty badass of her though. Gave me a heart attack for a second before I remembered I hadn't even cheated anyways, so there was nothing to be scared about, haha. That sounds like me every single time I see a cop. I mean, I live a decent crime-free life and never stole anything, but something about seeing a uniformed cop just sets all my brain alarms off. The students deserved that. TBH, I've gotten my hands on some old exams as well back in college days, but I never relied on them as just answer keys. I used them more as a practice exam and solved/studied them on my own. Never had an issue with professors changing things around because by the time I was done reviewing last year's exam, I was totally fine not cheating. I guess it's still cheating with some level of integrity. OP replied. While I don't want my final exams in general circulation, what you described is quite fine. Even if you don't give them back, shit's gonna happen. I once listened to an audio recording from a friend of a previous student describe the questions on a final from a few semesters ago. It was pretty accurate too. Students find a way. High school teacher. Do this all the time. When I first switched to test, I switched 2 questions along the lines of 6 plus 3 by 5 and what is a polygon with 10 sides. Super dumb kid in class answered 6 plus 3 by 5 equals decagon. Always makes me laugh. Reminds me of that I Love Lucy episode where Lucy tries to cheat on a quiz show by stealing the answers. But they change the questions at the last moment. An answer: what is the name of the animal that fastens itself to you and drains you of your blood? Lucy, the collector of internal revenue. An answer: what is a senator's term of office? Lucy, the sap runs every 2 years. An answer: why did the French people put Marie Antoinette under the sharp blade of the guillotine? Lucy, to scrape the barnacles off her hull. An answer: what did George Washington say while crossing the Delaware? Ricky, please let me sit down. This is making me sick. An answer: that's right. Last line was Ricky, not Lucy. I had a high school teacher, let's just call him Smith. Every year he gave a take-home test as part of his grade. He set up a Yahoo answer that said this is the answers for Mr. Smith's 30 class. All those answers were wrong and every year he got 1 or 2 students who would fall for it. God bless Mr. Smith. My statistics for engineering professor used the same exact quizzes and tests every semester. My roommate had all the completed and graded quizzes and tests from someone who took the class a semester before. And we were allowed to bring a formula sheet. Father. It's a joke these days. My online chem class, everything is on Quizlet. 70% of grade online test, 30% midterm and final. This was like 15 years ago. Miss Readers, watch your plane go down in flames. Very glad you're not a flight instructor. I did, too. I was like, wow, OP does not duck around. Had a kid take my final and use it to cheat, got busted and is still in the program. Potentially will graduate with a degree that looks like mine and I bust my ass to get my good grades. But I'm not bitter. Duckers. Back in college, I took an upper-level finance course. One of my favorite professors. Great teacher. He was also known for giving the same exams every semester. A few kids rarely showed up prior to the midterm, relying on the previous semester's exam as studying material. Midterm time comes, it's the same exam as last semester, and these kids all got an A. So, they decided to not go to class again and rely on the exam from. I'm guessing that the professor noticed the drop in attendance as the semester progressed. Well, on the final, he reworded a question and changed the numbers. But more importantly, the name of the widgets being sold in the word problem. The kids come in for the final exam super confident. Copy verbatim answers from the previous exam. Exams were only 2 to 3 questions. They think it's the same and they, once again, think they ace the exam. We go to the next class. Final exam was 1 week before class is finished and attendance after the final exam was mandatory, and everyone receives their grades. All of the students knew we needed to pass this course in order to graduate with this major. Professor gives back the exams to go over them. Goes over the exam, then dismisses everyone except for the students that copied their answers from the previous semester's exam. He called them out on cheating and said he could get them expelled from the university, even with being so close to graduating. They admit to it and the professor lets them retake the exam right then and there, knowing he just reviewed the exam with everyone. They end up barely passing and are able to graduate. He gave a good lecture to those kids and they learned a valuable lesson. This wasn't a scenario to really ruin some kids' lives over. They learned the lesson and got a second chance and they made it work. Such a cool move by the professor. Love it. I caught a cheater. I have multiple versions of the exams and that's a well-known fact. But what's less advertised is there's exam A1 and A2 and B1 and B2. Might not fly for fairness at the university level but okay at middle school. Kids who are suspected cheaters get the A2 and B2 that look very close to the A1 and B1. Just the orders and numbers are slightly switched. Looks exactly the same at first glance. Lol. I've had all kinds of different test versions in college. It is getting more and more popular now to take math and science tests on the computer, in class, because it is easier to stop cheating. Each problem automatically generates the questions with just slightly different figures, so each person's correct answer would be different. If you copy off someone else, you're gonna be very wrong.